So one of the things I want to do is in this video is show you how easy it is to make bread. And we'll start with using the basic 1-hour dinner roll recipe that you find on www.cookswell.com. Before I get into much detail about why the video, I want to show you we're going to start by the very first part of this process is getting yeast into the water. I've got the water measured between 90 and 100 degrees there. It's not too hot, not too cold. If you go too warm with it, it kills the yeast. So we're just going to put a little bit of, we're going to take about half the sugar from that recipe, dump that in there. We'll just dump the rest over in the flour mix. And the yeast that's called for in the recipe, and we'll whisk that together. Some people worry about stainless and yeast. I've never had a problem with it. So we'll just whisk that together and set that aside to sort of start yeasting, if you will. It's the gas bubbles from the yeast that cause the rise in the bread. Okay, so here's why this video. I write about the making of bread all the time. Dinner rolls, cheese garlic bread's one of the favorites. People that have this stuff love it. They're like, I wish I could do that. You can do that. But I looked at the blog posts that I have written and the instructions, and they can be overwhelming in terms of the amount of text, and people go, whoa, I'm not sure I get that concept, or that's an awful lot of work, or what have you. It's really not. And the only way to demonstrate that, though, is to demonstrate it. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, for the purposes of this video, again, I pre-measured everything, and it's a great way to do it when you start to make the bread yourself. Just go down the list, pre-measure it in pinch bowls, and you just work from there. So, but to keep this video short, we're just going to go at it this way. So, here we have the flour with with the balance of the sugar in there. There's our powdered buttermilk, salt, and baking soda, not baking powder, baking soda like Arm & Hammer or what have you. And we just whisk the dry ingredients together. Okay? Get that kind of whisked and distributed real well. In there we have a little ramekin with 1/4 cup of butter, which any kind of liquid at all, you're going to measure amongst your total liquid when you are baking bread. Now, I'm going to make another video, or there should be another video up here, about how to measure wet and dry ingredients. I would ask you that you refer to that so that you make sure you understand how accurate to start with. Bread baking is both an art and a science. And until you kind of get the basics down, you should start by measuring everything exactly so you know what your starting point is. And then you can backfill later on with other ingredients. Alright, so we've got that mixed up. Now we're going to whisk this one more time, make sure it's all good to go. You can see some of the bubbles already frothing in there from the little yeast farts, if you will. Okay, now dump that right in the middle. See how I've got a little well built there? Just going to dump that right in here. And then I like just this rubber spatula to just sort of mix things around, and scraping the sides, just fold things together. It's as easy as that. So fold that together until it becomes one clumpy mess. Then we'll add the butter on top of all this, and then we'll work on the kneading part, if you will, before we set it aside for the first rise. We're going to let this dough rise first for about 15 to 20 minutes. Just sort of let it relax into itself and let the yeast get to work on it. And then we'll form it and then let it go for a second rise and then bake it. Okay, add the butter. And looks like we've got just about the right amount of liquid to solids in there, liquids to dry ingredients. Maybe use a little bit more liquid. See if there's any more in here. A little bit. So then I'm gonna start to knead the dough. One of the key things you can do is just like this. You dunk your hand in the flour so it sort of coats your fingers. Not too much. Bring that together. Just press down on it, roll it a little bit. It's still a little moist. Might have to add a little bit of flour to it, but not going to just yet. Not going to just yet, because I want to knead it just a little bit. Not much. Not going to overwork it. You overwork it, your bread becomes tough. Yes, there's scientific and technical reasons for that. You and I don't need to get into that. Not right now, we don't. So how do you know when it's the right consistency? Well, that's almost there, but I don't like that texture. It should be a little smoother. One of the key things is the texture. The other is, does it spring back readily when you push a finger into it? So it's going to run a little more flour in there. Knead it a couple more times. See how that texture is smoothing out? A little bit more. Not much, just a little pat here and there. Now, I'm going to tell you something. The moisture in the air where you're working makes a big difference in how much liquid versus flour you use in your recipe. And so each batch is going to be individual. Each batch is going to depend on that moisture that's existing in the air. So if you live like on one of the coasts, you're going to add probably a little more flour than you might think. And if you live in the desert or the highlands, you might add a little more liquid just to make it right. Okay, now I don't want to go too much further with this, but look at that. That's a little better. Push down on it, it springs right back. So that's good to go there with that. Next thing we're going to do, we're just going to cover it with... Okay, we're back. The bread's gone through its first rise, as you can see in the pan here. And I'll just turn it over real quick, and you can see where the bottom of it's very loose and flaccid, if you will. But it even feels dense and heavier. It's not really. It's the same volume of material there. So we're going to shape it now and form it, put it in the pan for the second rise before we bake it. Now what I've done here is just taking one of these baking mats and sprinkled a little bit of flour on there to make it easy to not stick to there. But one of the things that I'm going to do that I haven't read about a lot, it's not in the original instructions for this recipe. My sister, who's a great baker, always calls this punch down, but I actually knead it two or three times just by folding it over. I think what happens there is that it just lets the yeast find maybe a little bit a newer section of food in there and go ahead and grow a little bit more, and makes it easy. But notice I'm just folded it over, pushed it down, not really, you know, kneading it with the knuckles, anything like that. So you can see I haven't worked this bread a whole lot, if you will. It's the fourth time here. And now what I'm going to do is get this little dough ball right here. So we're just going to cut this dough ball and form dinner rolls out of it. Now you can cut it any way you want. You can use a cookie cutter or what have you. You can make a dozen. You can make 9, which is what I normally make. We're big eaters here, big people. No point in going back for seconds when you can have it all the first time, right? So, cutting it like that. I mean, you could really just throw them in the pan just like this, but I take and shape them into a dough ball just by rolling them around in the middle of the hand like that. Now, notice the pan's got a little bit of melted butter on the bottom of it, maybe a tablespoon of butter. You're going to see that my dough balls are not all the same size. Sorry guys, that's just the nature of the beast. I'm not in Hollywood, I'm not perfect, neither are you, don't worry about it, okay? There's the right size for everybody. Somebody will pick the bigger, somebody will pick the smaller. So, put those in here. Now, not a whole lot of work has gone into doing this, has it? You think about the original segment of this, the first part of it was the big part, and that didn't take but just a few minutes to get together. I'll take this out after it's risen and show you what the pan looks like one last time before we actually turn the oven on and bake it. Guess I could have made a dozen out of it, but whatever. I mean, I like big rolls. Just drop them in there. Oop, better get that one together. Get it together, buddy. If you do it this way, by the way, if you cut the dough instead of cutting it with a cookie cutter, you don't end up with a bunch of little extra pieces, which by the time you fold them together and knead them together into a solid piece again, you really end up with a tough piece of dough, and that particular roll, if you will, at the end doesn't come out real good. Put the bigger ones at the outer edge. And that's it. We're going to go put it back in its place to rise for the second time for 30-40 minutes, and we'll go from there. So since it's in the middle of the winter out here, well, not really, it's just getting started, but it's coolish in this house. What I've done is I'm sticking the buns, the rolls, into the oven, and I've had this oven set with the door closed and the light on inside, so it's slightly warm in there, and that helps the rise. That's how that works. Alright, now I've just taken the rolls out of the oven after their second rise. I let them stay in there for about 45 minutes because I wanted a really big rise on these things. I want them light and fluffy. You could actually start baking them at 30 minutes, but 45, all good. So now we're going to set the oven to 425 and let that preheat, then we'll put them back in there. Now, I'll tell you guys, if you have a gas oven, there's a little cheater method to this thing. Leave them in the oven while it preheats. They'll rise even more and be even fluffier. So, but the electric doesn't work so well because electric doesn't heat as fast. Okay, so we've had these dinner rolls in the oven for about 12 minutes at 425 degrees. Notice the top, lightly brown, not real brown. Don't want it real brown. And I'm going to show you something that I learned the other day, that just to check if you're concerned at all about whether or not the dough is done. You take this instant read thermometer. I'm going to insert it at an angle over here to where the tip is about where I estimate center to be, and I'm going to look and see on the dial if we're anywhere close to, say, 190, 200 degrees. It's easing on up there. We're at about 185. I'm going to call it good right here on this set of rolls, okay? So turn the oven off, and then take and brush a little bit of butter on top to just sort of moisten them here. Now, one thing I want to mention, I don't use a double bottom pan when I'm baking bread because the bottom tends to not cook anywhere near as fast as the top, and so you end up with this sort of semi-mushy, quasi-mushy bottom to the rolls or the bread. They're a good thing, you know, if you don't want to burn the bottom of your cookies, things like that, but for your basic bread, no need, and shouldn't probably do it at all. Alright, now let's see what these things look like inside. There it is from the side. Tear that thing open. Look at the steam that comes out of that. Oh my gosh. We're just going to have a little butter on the inside. I gotta have a little butter, you know what I'm saying? Have a little butter. As my buddy Ralph Granger says, biscuits, bread, dinner rolls, things like that, it's not so much about them. They're the carrier for things like jelly, honey, that kind of thing. Anyway, hope this works out for you. Again, visit the website www.cookswell.com. Leave any questions you may have there. Contact me by sending me an email at cookie@cookswell.com.